What are some of the darker effects COVID-19 has had that we don't talk about? My brother who works for DSS said during the pandemic child abuse reports plummeted, which likely means unfortunately that, rather than there being less abuse, there are less chances for people like teachers having a chance to catch and report the signs. I'm a foster parent. DCS told us they were overwhelmed with cases because domestic violence and abuse from everyone being at home all the time. In our area there are not enough workers or foster parents, so children. It's definitely a dark side of the pandemic. Domestic abuse has increased, but another related thing that seemingly nobody is really talking about, there is an increase of children, especially those raised in non-traditional homes, for example older parents or grandparents as guardians who are being put into the foster system or the very least into another family member's home due to COVID-related deaths. Even if they are not being put in the foster system, children are losing their parents to COVID. It is, to me, the most tragic loss. Well, everyone else has mentioned mental health, but what I think is worth pointing out, COVID massively accentuated political and social divisions within Western countries. It's been leveraged to have that effect, and I mean hard leveraged through social media and all kinds of propaganda. Someone seriously wants America to tear itself apart with a civil war, and some of those people are Americans. Not only America, tensions have been on the rise in Europe and South America as well. The work environment has been rather toxic. I work in a company where some people have the option to stay home while others don't, and it has caused some resentment between departments. I see that resentment some too. People who had to come in were resentful that some got to work remote. Now they are making everyone come in some, and those who could work remote are resentful. A skyrocket in domestic abuse as families are forced inside with one another, coupled with financial issues, or just people being stuck with abusive partners with nowhere to go. Also, increased alcohol consumption. More division between families because of opinions, beliefs on how to deal with COVID. I've never had any major issues with my family, but we fall in different camps now on COVID. My wife and I are requiring masks while around our newborn, and are not letting anyone but us hold her until she has had her vaccinations. This is not just due to COVID, but also RSV currently being sky high. My mother constantly chafes against our boundaries and accepts them only begrudgingly, and is clearly miffed not being allowed to hold her. It just breaks my heart that they can't see we are only doing this to protect our daughter, not to be cruel to them. These requirements apply to everyone regardless of vaccination status. I'm just glad my in-laws back us up on this. My mom wants to come visit from Florida for my daughter's birthday. I told her if she is vaccinated and tests negative at the airport, she's more than welcome. She decided not to come. For me, it's been far too easy to isolate. I literally do not have to go outside of my house except to take out trash. Everything is deliverable. A local laundromat even started cashing in on the craze briefly by picking up dirty laundry at customers' homes and delivering it clean. My depression and social anxiety have absolutely flourished. Being single became crushingly lonely, especially if you were already looking for someone. I haven't re-downloaded Tinder in the past year because you tend to forget how much worse it makes you feel generally when you do get a match, but matches still give you that match hangover anyway. It just made me feel like I was a commodity on a dating market, like I wasn't in control of the standards that mattered, and that didn't matter to me. Which, yes, is true to a universal extent living in the West. But there's things you can control about that in real life. Online dating makes you feel like your value as a whole person is exclusively tied up with and on the platform, which is a design feature I'm sure, and it encouraged me to let go of my standards in peer plan, so eventually I had to let it go. Old folks getting cut off from their kids and social interactions. I think a lot of them are suffering in silence. Edit: if you haven't spoken to your parents or grandparents in a while, give them a call. My grandparents live in Canada and I haven't been able to see them in 2 years. I'm a therapist working in bereavement and attached to a local hospice. The past 18 months have been brutal. The amount of trauma and instances of stalled or complicated grief responses I have seen have definitely increased. not being able to mourn the death of a loved one properly, not being able to be with them as they die, not being able to visit them, not being able to hold proper funerals, not being able to hug each other or sit near each other when saying goodbye. These things are massively increasing the difficulties in people being able to process their loss and grief, even when the person has not died of COVID-19. We rely on these rituals, these mourning processes, these avenues of community support to help us come to terms with and cope with loss. So many of these comforts have been denied to people, both to those dying and those who are being left behind. It has been a grueling and incredibly depressing 18 months in this field, and I believe that we are going to see a huge amount of unresolved trauma and complicated grief over the next few years. Edit Grandma. My cousin killed himself last May. The family only just had a memorial for him. Over a year later. That lack of closure killed me. Mentally. Couldn't see family to grieve with them. Even when they finally had the service. I couldn't get to it. I wound up having a memorial on my own. Because I needed it. I needed that. Almost. Permission to grieve and say goodbye. And I know I'm far from alone on this horrific experience. A general decline in people's social skills. Especially for the introverted and young children starting schooling during the pandemic. Yeah, I agree. I've kinda always had social anxiety, but because I'm not going out as much I can barely even go to the shops without panicking. It's gonna take me a long time to get used to socializing again. There's going to be a rise in drug and alcohol addiction coming out of this. Guarantee. I work with a lot of folks that are in recovery and the rate of relapse has gone through the roof. I've had more clients overdose and die last year than I lost due to COVID. Definitely more than previous years. Families that used to be wealthy with young children in the house suddenly having no food, no electricity, no heating. Having to call families I work with and actually ask, is there food in the house was heartbreaking. Many of my students are from artistic families, freelancers, actors, musicians, theater people. Parents went from a really high income to almost none, since many of them were self-employed. Not to mention parents who couldn't speak English not being able to apply for any financial support, food vouchers or housing support. Increased pediatric obesity. The rate of increase in pediatric obesity doubled during lockdowns according to CDC. Edit rephrase for accuracy as you pretty meter cited below. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. I know so many adults who have gained weight, so it makes sense. I worked for 10 years to get my anxiety to go away. 10 long years of exposure therapy. Now I'm back to square one. Panic attack as soon as I walk out the house. 10 years of work for nothing. I have never felt my depression this bad. I'm going to start doing a lot more drugs. I'm trying to manage my THC intake. I don't like how I've started using it as something to pass the time. I was not an everyday user until last Christmas. Now I'm an everyday user. I would need a few weeks of detox to stop doing it altogether, but I don't feel the need to stop yet. I still take care of my family and I still work single income, but I just want legit downtime that I can't get because we are all stuck in the house together. My weed use went from occasional to nightly over the pandemic too. Sometimes there's just not much to do. Plus getting a little toasted before a shower feels incredible. It's fun. I feel no real need to stop and take opportunities, short trips, etc. for breaks when possible. I'm still doing everything I need to do in my life. Life is hard. If smoking a quarter a month or so is my vice these days, then so be it. As long as it doesn't become problematic, something you must determine individually or otherwise cause serious detriment. I see no reason to assign morality to using a drug to relax each night just like a drug to kickstart each morning. Mental health. I'm dealing with post-self-harm depression, and then I'm suddenly stuck in a bed for a month without my meds because of COVID. And everyone just keeps saying that I need to have positive attitude to beat the sickness. We were watching The Office the other day and my 4-year-old asked why they were not wearing masks. We had to remind him that life used to be different. I can only imagine what is going through our children's heads. NSFW tag because the first thing I thought of was how many kids were stuck at home with abusive families. I'm not sure what could pop as an answer. The increase of echo chambers on social media. Yes, Reddit is included. Echo chamber, an environment in which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions that coincide with their own, so that their existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas are not considered. That it's going to happen again, and we are not going to change anything about the way we structure society or react to crisis. Parts are harder to come by, and everything is more expensive. My neurologist mentioned that the patients they are seeing are all high-functioning people, many of which had minor or asymptomatic experiences. An emergency room doctor who can't get certified by his board to work due to cognitive issues. CEOs struggling to run their companies. Lawyers who struggle to practice law. They're building an entire neurological wing and struggling to find doctors. Now look at that, potentially affecting millions, billions of people. Our entire species may be stupider as a consequence of fighting this virus. Supply chain shortages. It's contributing to skyrocketing cost of living everywhere. Every time things shut down, it only gets worse. As an ICURT, I have had the unfortunate privilege of watching COVID PTs literally lose their minds and try to kill themselves, typically while having to wear BPAPs for extended periods of time. Some literally rip the masks off and scream like animals while writhing in their beds. Others rip them off and say how much better they feel, even though their O2 saturation percentage drops like a stone down into the 20s and 30s. Normal is around 95% to 97%. But with COVID we are lucky to keep them at 88%. They literally fight us to put it back on. By this point, the only option left is intubation and being put on a vent, which they will probably die on. It only happens to maybe 1 out of every 15 PTs that wind up in the ICU with COVID needing high levels of supplemental O2. It's completely insane in my book anyway, and yet most people don't know about it. Mental and cognitive issues. The legal system is so far backed up, it's terrifying to think how many violent people have yet to go to court or be detained because of how backed up they are from COVID. I filed charges on SAM and regular assault a year ago, and they have not even looked at my case yet. This person I filed against is still walking free with no consequences. Terrifying. Talking by personal experience, I think heart disease has long-term consequences. I had COVID, but never knew it, not even a small symptom, and yet I was so close to die. One day I suddenly passed out 2 times and had a cardiac arrest. The virus and the consequent fight of it weakened my cardiovascular system to a point where my heart couldn't handle it anymore. It will be decades until the effects on the psychology and economic chances of current children come to light. In some countries, children missed school years with only bare-bone online and TV options to catch up. Children have been growing up with constant warning to not get too close to other people, sanitize everything and wear masks. Do they learn how to read a stranger's mimic? Do they focus on the eyes instead of the whole face? Older children experience a tsunami of hatred, mistrust, misinformation and division both in their families and their countries. How ducked up will they be once they are allowed to vote themselves? I'm quite glad that I don't have children and don't have to worry about their long-term coping. As a late teenager, I can say there's definitely this overall feeling of imminent disaster associated with politics, science, and interpersonal situations. Everybody I know seems to feel similarly. The environment is ducked. The economy is ducked. The public health is ducked. It feels like the world is ending and everybody is either too stupid or too tied up with the current issues to address any of it. I won't be surprised if the US starts falling apart within the next 50 years. People are getting used to and comfortable with mass death. People shrug off the notion of it's only the elderly and people with preconditions, even though those groups should be the most protected. I feel we are getting numb to COVID deaths like we were mass shootings because there's no political will to change either. Long COVID that causes inability to work was news at the end of July when President Biden announced that those affected could be eligible for Social Security disability payments. Since then I haven't seen much more about it. Increasing the number of people eligible for SSDI could be a big deal in the future. In my opinion, the darker effect is definitely the people with other illnesses that couldn't get treatment because of the lockdown rules. Many people couldn't get life-extending radiation treatment and are no longer around. Somehow I feel there could have been a better alternative to no treatment.